Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today I have a very special guest back on for multiple times now, Bryan Boorstein. Everybody, I feel like at this point should know him. Maybe I do have some new guests, but yeah, Bryan's actually my programming coach. He does my programming, somebody I look up to, always reaching out for questions, got a ton of great information. And yeah, man, really enjoy having you on here and thanks for coming back on again.
Of course, yeah. Always glad to chat with you about these kind of nerdy, nuanced topics.
We we have a nice little rhythm going. I have you on every couple months, and then you and Jordan also come on now at the same. So we just got a nice little rhythm going on here with all this. But yeah, man, your episodes always do well. People always love to hear what you have to say. I think it's been, I don't even know the last time we chatted on here. You and I are chatting all the time, but I think it was probably November-ish, maybe late October that we had you on last time. How's everything been going? Anything different or any big things pop up during that period of time? Fitness, non-fitness related or anything like that?
Yeah, I guess there's been a few. In early December, I did an impromptu trip to Costa Rica, like an introspective um figure some things out that have been burdening me on my mind, and booked that trip with a buddy of mine who had recently just lost his job, so he was going through some stuff, and we had a great experience down there. I had already been made the decision that I was going to start a new podcast called Life Reflected, which is tangential to fitness in that I like to open every episode talking about movement and how the guest incorporates movement into their life, whether that's exercise or not, or some kind of combination of the two. The way that movement impacts your mindset and your energy and the way you can frame life, how you feel about movement when you don't get it in versus how much pressure you put on yourself to get it in. I think just the way people incorporate movement into their life is fascinating. I decided I was going to start that podcast. And my first guest, we just recorded the episode a couple days ago. So we spent about 45 minutes talking about movement and then an hour 15 talking about our topic du jour, which was I wanted to bring him on because he's extraordinary in the sense that he is what you would call a super connector. Every friend group has that guy who is the glue of the group, who reaches out to everybody, keeps tabs on what everybody's doing, always organizes the events, and is literally the person that's just friends with everybody. And this is my friend Greg. And I find that personality to be increasingly intriguing, especially because I come a bit from the other side of the spectrum where I gravitate toward introversion over extroversion. And so we had a really cool conversation going back and forth on some of our inherent nature and why we are the way we are and things like that. First episode should be out in a week or two, like I guess early February, mid-February. And that's project one. I'm working on another project that is basically centered more around this idea of movement. And I don't really want to talk too much about it beyond that. But yeah, those are two personal things going on. And then we can get into some training stuff if you like.
Yeah, podcast, man. That's awesome. So it's just you, right? You're running it. You're going to have like guests on. Will you do like solo episodes or will it just be like you're going to have like guests on and stuff like that?
I think it's mostly going to be guests. I've entertained the idea of some solo episodes to go through some things that I personally am experiencing that I want to be open about. But my buddy Greg, who I did that first episode with, he and I, aside from the fact, the introversion and extroversion piece, like he and I just balance each other really well in the way that we think about things. And so I think I want to bring him on as a co-host, if not for every episode, at least for some, because I think that our different perspectives on the way we see life is going to create a really nice back and forth with our guests as we delve into the things that make that person unique.
Nice. That's awesome. And not to get too much into it, was there any, you said you guys spent 45 minutes talking about movement. Is he not typical, weight training, cardio types? Is his a little bit different? And it sounds like those are some of the people that you want to potentially have on, maybe that think maybe outside of the box from a movement perspective.
Yeah, I want to have people on from all varieties of movement. Like I want to bring this one girl on who does ultra distance marathons. So she just did a 200-mile race, like running,
Wow.
which is insane. I can't even imagine what all goes into that. And then I also want to bring people on that maybe are like less into the fitness side of movement and more into like just yoga and meditation and walking and all spectrums. I want to incorporate all spectrums of that. Greg is more like me, not exactly, which was what made the conversation nice. He does CrossFit type stuff twice a week. He goes out on hikes with his bros in the morning, like twice a week, and he lifts weights once or twice a week, and then he'll try to do like a cardio, like a long bike ride once a week. So he's also like me in the sense that he likes to move every day, which to me is very interesting because we spent some time delving into that nature of the people that need to move every day and how that impacts your frame of mind for a day as to whether you don't get that workout in, maybe life hits you in some weird way and you're unable to get the movement that you planned, and how does that affect you versus different types of movement and how that affects your frame of mind. And so it was a nice conversation in that regard.
That's awesome. Yeah, I know like you. I was just on your Instagram a little bit ago, actually looking through this, and I know like for you, I think you made this post a little over a year ago. It says December 5th, 2023, about what is health and ode to exercise. So I feel like this kind of been something that you've been thinking about for a while now at this point.
Yeah, man, absolutely. I guess it's a transition into the next thing that's going on with me, which is injuring my low back, and how that's even reframed in some ways the way that I look at fitness and movement in my life. For anyone that doesn't know, as I've been spamming my Instagram story with this for the last month, but on December 26th, the day before leaving for a 6-day trip to Mexico with my family, I was getting my final weight workout in and doing leg curls, seated leg curls with a forward lean, something that I've done twice a week for years at this point with no issues. And something happened on the last rep of my first work set. And I just got this incredible pain bilaterally across both sides of my low back, right where the erectors insert into the coccyx, the glute area. So think like right below or at that bony structure that you feel, which is your coccyx, or your, yeah, I guess you would just call it, yeah, the coccyx, the muscle of the pubic bones that wraps around your back. And I could not, for the first 5 days, I could not even straighten up. So I couldn't get to full hip extension, for those that know what that means. Basically, anytime I would walk or stand, I would be standing with a slight forward lean of my torso because I
Yeah.
was unable to get to the position where I was standing straight up. And that lasted for 5 days. So anytime I was walking, leaning forward, anytime I was standing, I was leaning forward. There were very few comfortable positions for me. Man, it was just such a freak thing. And I still now, a month later, I'm still dealing with the residual impact of it. It's moved away from the bilateral nature and it's found itself into my right-sided QL, glute med, glute max, TFL, that whole region that wraps around from the outer hip all the way to where the low back inserts into the glute. That whole region, both in the low back and in the glute, very tight, very restricted, still lacking range of motion there if I try to side bend or anything like that. Obviously, I haven't done any RDLs in a long time because at this point, even bending over without any weight, I have to be cautious of. I can't just see my toothbrush on the ground and then be like, toothbrush, reach down, pick up. It's like toothbrush on ground. Okay, brace myself, stick my butt back, make sure the tension's in my glutes and hamstrings, bend down, grab the toothbrush. And this is a month out. So yeah, it's really that what you noted about the idea of this movement and ode to health and exercise and all that being on the front of my brain. This has even made it more prominent. And I don't want to say that that I don't care about hypertrophy anymore, but I don't care about hypertrophy at this exact moment. The saying goes, when you're healthy, you have 1,000 wishes. When you're unhealthy, you have just one wish. And that is how I feel. Like I just want to get back to feeling really good again. And I'm hesitant to take movements that have in the past caused me low back discomfort, like RDLs. I'm hesitant to take them to heavy loads or close to failure proximities. I think possibly for the rest of my life, but at least in this moment, I feel very hesitant about that.
Yeah, like you said, you're not worried about hyper at this moment. It's just feeling better. You mentioned the like picking up the toothbrush. Like I know I've had some like small tweaks, not anything like that. That's been like it seems like it's lasted for almost a month now at this
Yeah.
point for you. And from I remember what you were saying like on your social media, it was seemed like it was pretty bad at least for the first like couple days. But man, it is crazy how like things like picking stuff up, like how you take those you take those things for granted basically, right? And then like when you can't do them, you're like, man, okay, this freaking sucks. I really got to think about doing this, and just all the stuff that you do on a daily basis that you just really don't think about, like how those things can impact your day to day there with that. And I thought the toothbrush was like a great example of that.
Yeah, it's expansive across many aspects of life. My daughter wants me to carry her up the stairs, and up until a couple days ago, I would have to say, no, daddy can't carry you up the stairs because his back is hurt. It's this weird sense of feeling like I aged 30 years overnight. It's weird. It's really weird.
What so you obviously change up your training a little bit. Did you do anything else to help speed up the recovery process, or at least things that you felt did help that process? Or yeah.
Yeah, it's tough to parse out how much the things that I'm doing are helping it heal versus just time helping it heal. I don't have that comparison to be able to go back and not do the things that I was doing and see if I end up at the same place anyway. So I'm a little bit skeptical of things that I've been doing and their ability to help, just given that it's been a full month and that I'm still dealing with some of the ramifications of it. But I did commit to 20 minutes of floor time every day. And by floor time, I just mean sitting and stretching on the floor. So not having a chair, actively moving my body, whether it's dynamically or statically, just spending 20 minutes on the floor moving. That seemed to have helped, at least acutely. I spend a ton of time on a lacrosse ball anyways. I carry one with me in my car, in my backpack, in my wife's car. Like literally we have 6 lacrosse balls around the house in various places. And anytime I'm watching TV or playing cards, it doesn't really matter. I'm pretty much always on a lacrosse ball in some part of my body. So that's just continued, and I've redirected some of that to the areas that are bothering me, the glute, the QL. And then I've been seeing my PT person once a week instead of once a month, which it was my normal cadence. And with that, we do dry needling and cupping and some scraping. And then I just had my first deep tissue sports massage yesterday. And she actually provided some really cool insight, which was that she believes the pain that I'm dealing with right now, which is mostly centered in the lower QL. And I did mention it expands out to the glutes, but mostly lower QL. She was telling me how the psoas muscle on the front side of the body is actually like the anterior version of the QL. Like they're both abdominal muscles. One's posterior located and one's anterior. And she was saying that she thinks the issue right now is that the psoas and the QL are intertwined with each other. Like they're supposed to be intertwined, but they're like too intertwined. And so I need to break up some of what's happening between the psoas and the QL right now. So she recommended spending a bunch of time on the front side of my body on the psoas, which is a bit painful. She said not to make it too painful, but inherently it's quite painful. And I just started doing that today. We'll see if that ends up helping.
Like mobility stretching or like lacrosse ball or what on the
Yeah, mostly she wants the tissue itself to be stretched, meaning that so when you put the lacrosse ball or the psoas wedge, have you seen the So Right thing on Amazon?
uh-uh.
It's like this little structure. I don't have one, but it's basically these two wedges that you stick into your psoas and you just lay on it. And so what she was saying is that when you apply pressure to that area, it is in fact stretching that muscle because it's being pulled apart through the pressure that you're putting on it. So yes, I am stretching it in the sense that I'm doing like stretches for my hip flexor and stuff like that. The couch stretch from Kelly Starrett, wall
Yep.
stretch or whatever. Yeah, I do that. But as far as, yeah, I think directly the pressure into the psoas is what she was going for.
What's that called that you said?
It's called a So Right, like SORITE. It's like a $50 piece of plastic.
Gotcha. Okay, so I see. Interesting. And so again, that pressure. So you could technically use like or would a lacrosse ball not get
I did.
the pressure?
I used a lacrosse ball last night and it was
Yeah.
fine. I do think what she wants is something a little more pointed and acute.
Yeah.
Like the lacrosse balls, yeah, it's his diameter is too wide to really
Yeah.
get in there properly.
I didn't know you used the cross ball so much. That was one habit that I used to be really good at. And I have it's called a peanut, right? So it's two lacrosse balls. I do that for
Yep.
my back and that feels really good. And I'll use it elsewhere. But man, I really got out of the habit of using that lacrosse ball. And I'll tell you what, if it feels great and like it definitely, I think it does make a difference. And what's crazy is how your body adapts to that now, right? Because I feel like I could get super deep and I just feel like I'm assuming that's the case, right? Where you can build up a tolerance to it over time to where if you don't do it for a
Yeah.
while, it's like it feels super like sensitive and you can't really
Yeah.
get as deep. And it's like just the pain, like it starts to hurt a little bit more until you can ease back into it.
Yeah, we actually had that exact same occurrence yesterday when I was at the massage appointment. She was doing my right glute and right QL, and it felt to me like she wasn't going that deep. I told her twice. I was like, "Hey, you can go deeper if you think it would be beneficial." And she just like ignored me. Fuck, what's she doing? So then she goes over to the left side and it's fucking awful. It's so hard. I'm like, I'm like, "You're not actually going harder on the left side, are you?" And she was like, "No, it's the same." And I was like, so is your hypothesis that I've desensitized my right side through just like mashing it with a lacrosse ball over and over? And she was like, yeah, I think that's exactly what was happening.
So is that would that be a good thing then
I
or
don't
not?
know. I actually don't know. But I will say that the lacrosse ball thing, a lot of people look at the lacrosse ball and they think of it as like an active chore or task that they need to do. And it's like painful for them or whatever. I feel the complete opposite. Like I almost feel like I'm addicted to it, where it's a nervous habit. It's like the way people bite their nails or whatever.
Yeah.
I need a lacrosse ball in me somewhere on my body because it's like something to do. And I thoroughly enjoy it. I don't, I lean into that targeted pain and I don't look at that as a negative.
Yeah. No, yeah, it hurts, but it does feel good at the same time.
Yeah.
So I can relate to that. Cool. Yeah, that's super interesting. That again, man, I need to get back. I've been thinking about that because I feel like I did feel really good. And that's the other thing too that I've been really been wanting to try to do a little bit more of is just some sort of like mobility and whether that be like a 5-10 minute yoga or just movement a little bit more. Cause I have gotten away from that. And I think that's if we're thinking here exercise and like long-term health and everything like that. I feel like that's super important to maintain that stuff. And you just feel better. Plus, I sit a lot more now than I ever did in the past. I can feel it in my hips, right? So I think it's important to do that type of stuff. And you said you're dedicating yourself to 20 minutes on the floor. So I'm assuming you're doing that kind of mobility type stuff, or would you
Yeah.
count the lacrosse ball and stuff towards?
But no, I don't count the lacrosse ball because the lacrosse, sometimes I'm on the floor but I'm still, I'm not moving. So I don't count the lacrosse ball time. Yeah, it's 20 to 30 minutes a night or whatever. Basically, instead of laying in bed or sitting on the couch to watch TV at night, I now just sit on the floor and stretch.
Yeah. Is that something that you think is important for people to like have in the overall rounded routine is to have some sort of movement type mobility stuff like that? Or what do you
I
think?
think as you get older, it's increasingly more important. If you would have asked me 5 or 10 years ago how important I thought that stuff was as like an early 30s guy, I would have told you that you didn't need to do it. As long as you're lifting weights with full range of motion, you're getting all the mobility work that you need. And there's still like a piece of me that believes that. But given that I feel differently about it now at 40 than I did at 30, I'm going to guess that I feel differently about it at 50 than at 40 and at 60 than 50. And when you look at this, Peter Attia talks about how you want to be able to get up off the floor with only 2 points of contact when you're in your marginal decade, like the last decade before you die. So if you're 75 years old, you want to still be able to get up off the floor without using your hands. That's challenging because it's challenging even for me now at 42. I was surprised by my inability to do that. I don't know if you saw, I put on my story that I was doing a poll to see who could sit down from standing with their legs crossed. So you start with one foot over the other and you sit all the way down under control without plopping onto the ground. And then you're able to stand back up with your legs crossed, all without using your hands. About 70% of women could do it, and about 70% of men could not do it, according to the poll. I don't know how much that's accurate, how many people are screwing with the poll, but those seem to me to be somewhat realistic numbers. At least with my current state and my low back injury, I can't do that. And I don't know if I could have done it before my low back injury. So it's something that I'm putting a lot of work into because I think if I can get up and down from the ground cross-legged, then I'm going to have no problem getting up and down from the ground not
Regular.
cross-legged.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So big picture with everything, like obviously we've talked in the past about like doing cardio weights. What are your thoughts on having some sort of like kind of power based type training in your program? Like again, is that something that you think is necessary or could weight training count as that? Or do you think that's not
Mm.
enough? Or what do you think
So
that?
you're talking about like box jumps, broad jumps,
Yeah,
and hang cleans, something like that?
yeah, something like that. Something that's maybe a little bit more explosive than like you would
Mhm.
do see from like hypertrophy style training or something like that.
Yeah, again, I would put that in the same category as the mobility stuff, where I think it becomes increasingly important as you get older because the fast twitch muscle fibers are the first things to go. And I've seen some literature that I think shows that the fast twitch muscle fibers begin to decrease after 30 years old or even late 20s pretty significantly. And if you look at the top Olympic lifters and those that are top sprinters, like the top athletes in explosive sports, they're generally young, like they're under 25. Given that goes so quickly and how important that is to just your ability to be athletic and stuff as we get older, I do think there's probably value in doing that. I would absolutely be including it in my own program right now if it hadn't been for the fact that my ceilings are so low that I can't do high box jumps and my gym is too small to do Olympic lifting. But I do think there's value, and I've flirted with the idea of including at least like some hang high pulls where you're getting like some momentum based training in there, as well as doing some broad jumps and things like that. And then you could add farmers carries, which aren't quite explosive in there, but it's another tool that you can use to just increase your resilience as you get older.
In terms of like programming, how would you fit that in say someone that is mostly doing hypertrophy? Is it like something like and again like the volume of it? Like
Mhm.
what does that kind of look like?
Yeah, I think it's honestly can be done pretty easily as your part A movement before you even begin your hypertrophy work, because explosive stuff isn't meant to be to failure. And when you do explosive stuff, it primes your nervous system and it can actually improve your performance on the hypertrophy stuff. I think if you're doing an upper body day, throwing in some hang high pulls where you're getting a little bit of hip hop in there and whatever, then that warms up your shoulders, biceps, upper back region pretty well. You could definitely do 3x5, 5x5, something along those lines. If it was 5x5, I'd probably just increase weight each set up to the top set of five. If you're doing a 3x5, maybe your top three sets aren't quite as heavy as the top five would be, but you're doing three of them. I'd say it's more about being explosive than trying to just add a bunch of weight to the bar. I don't think
Yeah.
there's a lot of aid in that. High box jumps. I actually love high box jumps. They've always been something I've been good at too, compared to my peers. And so I would love to incorporate stuff like that back in. But in the absence of having a high box jump, we can just do vertical jumps. Find a ceiling or some object that's slightly out of reach of your hand and just dip, jump, stand, or stand, jump, and try to touch that object for 3 reps. Do 5 sets of three or something like that, where each jump is as high as you can possibly go, and then take a breath, reset, go again. Maybe you rest a minute between your sets of three or something like that. That's the sort of thing that I think would make a lot of sense to put before a leg day. And I think it would improve your performance in the hypertrophy work as well.
Technically, you think you could get away with doing like one day of each of those? And again, I would imagine it's obviously where you're starting from, but I would imagine that would at least be enough to maintain, but even in some cases, probably even improve that kind of adaptation.
Yeah, if you had one day where you did like some upper body high pulls or explosive shrugs or something along those lines where you're getting some leg drive in there, and then one day where you're doing high jumps or broad jumps or a combo of both, yeah, I think that's super helpful.
And as you said too, I think probably where most people go wrong with that type of stuff is they do try to just be like too intense with it. And like you said, you want to be super recovered for it, and you don't necessarily want it to be like something that you're going like super heavy, right? So like if somebody did something explosive like that, like high pulls, like again, like you said, I could see people just trying to go way too heavy with it. And then like box jumps or something like that, I could also see them like doing it when they're fatigued and just like doing it to like burn calories and get your heart rate
Right.
up. And that's not
Right.
what you want to do there. You want to be like rested and recovered and
Ye-
good.
Yeah, exactly. So if what I would the example I used with the high jumps was you would do three in a row. Like imagine if you did 15 high jumps in a row. By the 15th high jump, your performance would have diminished so much. And so that's one of the key factors in this explosive type training is you want performance to sustain. Like as soon as you begin to lose performance, you're no longer firing all of the motor units and timing them exactly as you should be to ingrain these like good motor habits into your body or motor patterns. So yeah, I think making sure you're like fully recovered and doing like really small sets to be as explosive as possible on every single set. And then you can monitor your performance to make sure it's not diminishing. But I've found three jumps to be a good number where you do one, you take a 5 second reset, you do one 5 second reset, do another, and then rest a minute or two, and then do that again.
Yeah, this is interesting. I definitely, for myself, looking at my training, obviously recently, but even when I was in like high school and playing sports, I like just never really did anything super explosive. That was something that was always missing. So I feel like for myself, there's probably this like huge area of opportunity, but I also don't know. I would imagine there's some carryover from strength training and hypertrophy training to some of this, at least to some extent, right? Or,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe there's not. I don't know, but I would imagine there's some sort of carryover to that, at least a
I
little bit.
I I think without a doubt there's carryover. I think they're highly correlated. I think if you took somebody like yourself who hasn't done any explosive work but has been weight training for 20 years and we tested your 1 rep max vertical jump and your hang high pull, like your strength on those, your power output would be significantly higher than a layperson trying to do the same thing. Yeah, I would guess that you're probably in the 85th percentile of that or something without even ever training it.
Yeah.
Because yeah, if you're doing an explosive concentric on your weight training, that is the same idea.
Yeah. That because like I said, I've never did it like specifically, but like you're saying there, I figured there would be some sort of carryover. But like you said, you are still being explosive with your it's just different because it's like the intent when you're lifting heavier, it's like you are explosive, but it just moves slower because it's just
Mhm.
a lot heavier there. But again, as we said, there's probably some benefit to it being lighter and you actually really express that full kind of force there with that.
Yep, yep. If you want to include some of that stuff into your program, we
I
can
know
chat
I'm
off air about it.
yeah, I don't know. I definitely I think it would be beneficial. And again, the time that goes into it wouldn't be a lot either, the time aspect of it, just because again, I'm not trying to like, again, I would imagine if someone's like trying to be a professional athlete and like they need to do it for their sport, again, the time that would go into it would be a lot different. But maybe not. Maybe it's again just some sort of adaptation that you really don't need to do a lot of volume with in general.
Yeah, I think it's like one of those things where if you put in a little bit of time, you get the majority of the results, and then there's
With
diminishing returns and an asymptotal curve as you get more volume going from there.
with with most things, right? You get
Right,
most of your
right.
benefit right away, and then from there it's just yeah.
Chipping away.
Yeah, but I would imagine the volume for that compared to what you would want to do for hypertrophy is probably
Yeah,
power, strength, and then hypertrophy if we were going to put it on levels there.
absolutely. Yeah, because the CNS system is so taxed through a lot of the power stuff that you just don't need to do a lot of it. Or if you do, you're going to pay the price.
Yep. So this is a little goes hand in hand with it, but I did finally get a barbell. Now I just got to get some weights for the barbell. So I do have a barbell now. So I'm just thinking about that. But cool, man. Yeah, no, that's awesome. A topic we didn't think we would chat about. But as far as your cardio goes and your training in general right now, obviously the weight training side of things, I would imagine for you, it's just working around the injury, just trying to figure out what you can do at this point and just, yeah.
Yeah, at this point, like even for the last week and a half or so, I can pretty much do everything except RDLs as long as I warm up well. The way the back injury affects me at the moment is that if I'm warmed up, I feel like a hero and I can still do everything that I could do prior to the back injury. But not being warmed up, I feel like that old man who has aged 30 years overnight. That's good, at least that I can warm up and feel good. And it's been nice that it hasn't really affected my training a whole ton aside from eliminating RDLs. Initially, I did some single leg 45-degree hip extensions as my first reintroduction back to any lower body training at all. And those felt great. And I felt like I was getting some good glute activation. I did some pendulum squats maybe a week and a half ago, and those felt fine. And then last week, I did my hack squat machine for the first time since before the injury. And the craziest thing was that before the injury, my weight on there was 580 for five, then four. And that final set of four was zero RIR. I could not have done another rep. Then I have this low back injury. I take 3 weeks off from leg training for the most part. I come back and I have that one day of 45-degree hip extensions and a couple light pendulum squat sets. Then I go to do the hack squat machine last week and I hit 580 for five, five. And I had one RIR left on the last set of five. And it's just, I don't know what's wrong with my voice right now. So it's really made me start thinking about just frequency and volume overall. And I'm toiling with this idea of like, why did I perform so well? Was it because I was uber recovered? Like I hadn't trained my legs in 3 weeks? Is that why I performed so well? Is that a trend that could continue? Like maybe if I just train legs every 3 weeks, I could just continue to get strong in perpetuity. Don't know exactly what to make of it at the moment, but I very much did not expect to come back from that back injury and PR a movement that's been in my program in the exact same way for 2.5 years at this point. So that was super wild. And I'm just honestly very thankful that I'm able to continue training mostly unimpeded at this point.
Yeah. So when you say warm up, is it like warm up sets or specific warm up that you're doing?
Yeah, I go for a 20-minute walk pretty much before every time now just to get my body heat elevated. Then I come in and I'll do some foam rolling and some stretching on the ground. And I find stretching to be, it heats me up. Like it's not, I'll be stretching and I'll be like, man, I'm so hot. And I'll strip a layer off and then strip another layer off. And so I'll usually try to just move like that until I reach that point where I've stripped my layers off. And then I feel like my body's warm enough. And then, yeah, it's the normal amount of warm up sets. But before I would just go in cold and be like, cool, warm up set number one, warm up set number two, work set, boom, good to go. Now I have the walk plus the mobility work plus the blah, blah. And then it's okay, I'm good to go.
So you feel like that has made a decent difference in how or is it just, yeah.
It's really just a matter of warming it up. Like I think it could have warmed up in a number of ways. I don't think my specific protocol.
Gotcha.
I have to get my body warm and loose because it's so stiff otherwise.
At this point, because of the injury or
Because
just,
of yes,
got you.
because
Okay.
of the injury. Yeah.
When it gets fully healed, is this something you'll keep up or do you think you'll?
No, probably not. I can't
Okay.
imagine that I'm going to continue spending 40 minutes of prep before I work
But
out.
but 10 minutes, maybe like a little less.
Yeah, I could see value, especially in the winter of being warm going into sessions. My hypothesis on why I got injured is that I was dehydrated. And so that's one thing I've
Yeah.
been like super focused on because that specific day that I got injured, it was the day before we were leaving for Mexico and we were all just rushing around the house packing and trying to parent and like all of these things. And I realized in retrospect that I had only the water with my vitamins in the morning, like 3 hours earlier, and I didn't have an electrolyte drink, which I usually do in the morning. And so there's all these factors. And then I pull the muscle super weird doing a leg curl. And I feel like I need to be more cognizant of making sure that I'm semi-mobilized and very hydrated before going into sessions.
Yeah, that's interesting. How you just said all that. Also, the stress of just getting ready, I'm sure, for the trip and all that. And it's like all the accumulation of all that stuff and just the right combination just there with that. But
Yeah.
hydration's interesting. I know I've seen research on hydration where even like a little bit of dehydration, again, whatever that looks like, I don't know how exactly you'd measure that in everyday person, but even a little bit seems to impact training performance. And obviously it sounds like in your case, maybe even slightly, or in everyone's case, slightly increases injury risk as well too, of just doing even like a seated leg curl or something like that.
Yeah, I never in my life would have predicted that a leg curl would be the
Yeah.
thing to injure me in that manner. It's just so wild.
What about your cardio? Anything
Yeah,
with it?
I hadn't ridden my bike in a month because it's been so cold here. And then just last week, we had a day that was like 60 degrees and sunny. And I went out for a 2 hour zone two ride. I was just so amped that I was able to still go for 2 hours and pedal the entire time and maintain a zone two heart rate and keep good speed. All the things that I worry about losing in the off season, it was really cool to see that maintained. And I give a lot of that credit to the fact that I've been quite committed to running this winter. And it's been nice. I actually like, I can't say I enjoy running, but I am enjoying getting better at running and being able to run without it burdening me so much. Like I can actually run. The other day, I ran 3 miles in zone two. I couldn't even fathom doing that a few months ago. And so, yeah, I ran 3 miles in 31 minutes, which I know sounds terrible, 10 minutes a mile or more. But my heart rate average was 136 and I never went into zone three. So it was just a cool testament to it working. And I've basically only been doing that 3 days a week. I probably would do it more if it wasn't for, I feel like it's a bit of a burden on my Achilles. Like both sides initially were quite impacted by running. And then once I started doing weighted calf raises and lacrosse balling my calves, and I specifically like the area right above the Achilles, the issue is less prominent, but it's still significant enough that I'm not going to exceed beyond 3 days a week. And I think that's probably for the best, anyways.
So your cardio was 3 days a week running in your
Yeah, and then
zone.
I would say I usually get in one other workout other than the 3 runs. So I would say it's 3 runs plus either a bike ride or a row or a house AMRAP, which is the new thing I'm doing where
I
I'm
saw
just
that.
combining a bunch of cardio stuff like in my house, like running stairs and shuttle runs and stuff like that.
And is all of it your zone two, like lower intensity stuff, or like that
No,
obviously maybe is a little bit higher intensity?
yeah, I would say that in overall, I'm actually doing a lot more high intensity work this winter than I do during the bike season because while I can run in zone two, I don't quite enjoy running in zone two.
Yeah.
So I very much prefer to do 30-30 or minute, 2 minute, 1 minute, like any sort of aerobic based intervals I've been using more. And those tend to push me up into zone three, zone four. But because I'm really only doing cardio 3 days a week with maybe a fourth session in there, I do make sure at least one of those is a zone two. And then I don't really stress well, if I have two or maybe three like slightly higher intensity sessions, because on only one of them will I even get to like high zone four, zone five. So those other two are still like zone three, low zone four. So it's not like I'm pushing to the extremes of what would be hard for my body to recover from.
Yeah. So sounds like a couple days or you're pushing zone three, zone four, and then one day you're purposely dialing back closer to your zone two
Yep.
there.
Yep.
And what like makes it what decides whether you do 1 minute? Is it 1 minute like faster, 1 minute slower? Is that kind of what you said 30-30? What kind of determines the time frame on those?
Yeah, a lot of times it's just what I feel like doing on that
Got you.
day. I start every run with a mile in zone two, just because I like that as a warm up before I raise the intensity. It just gets my body prepared. And I think that's a non-negotiable. So I'll do a mile in zone two, which will take 10 or 11 minutes. And then I'll decide at that point how I'm feeling and base whether I have the three, actually, there's a number of different ways I do it. All of them are aerobic though. And by aerobic, I mean that the work time is either equal to the rest time or longer than the rest time. So 30/30s and 1/1s would be equal work to rest. And so those are the least aerobic intervals that I'll do. But I'll also do 2 to 1s where I'll run for 2 minutes and then walk for 1 minute. I'll do 4 to 2s. So run for 4 minutes, walk for 2 minutes. I've even done some 6 3s. And those are a little long. Like I don't love running for 6 minutes at a time. That starts to feel a bit burdensome too. But yeah, those are the primary ones that I'll do. And it really just depends on how I'm feeling that day and if my Achilles is feeling tight. If my Achilles is feeling tight, I trend toward lower intensity where I might do like a 6 3 or a 4 2 because I know I'm going to be running slower because I'm running longer. Whereas when I'm doing 30/30s or minutes, I'm running much harder because I'm getting equal recovery time.
That makes sense. What are you looking at in terms of progression? Are you even tracking that, or is it just, yeah?
No, I'm not so much tracking it. I would say, if anything, what I'm tracking is how I perform at my steady state runs. So, like when I'm doing that 1 mile of zone two to start, what does that mile of zone two feel like? As far as the intervals and stuff, I mostly am just trying to target a heart rate and a breathing pattern where I feel like I can move consistently with good form. I'm focusing a lot on my technique, making sure that I'm running properly because I know this sounds crazy to say, but with all this running volume that I'm doing, which I know some people look at and they're like, you're doing 12 miles a week, bro, relax. To me, it feels like a lot of running volume. I just want to be cautious and make sure that my close to 200-pound body doesn't break down.
Yeah. So, and then you hadn't done any biking for a while, so just getting a little bit more of that back in.
Yeah, like I said, I did it for the first time last week. I probably won't be able to do it again consistently until March or early April here, when the weather begins to shift. But my goal really this year is just to hold on to as many of the gains that I got last year so that I can start in March at a higher place than where I left off last year. And that seems to be consistent year to year. Like I'm able to maintain more in the off season so that I can start from a higher place in March and then thus end at a higher place in October before it gets cold again.
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll see. We'll see how it goes. I think this year I am gonna probably do less long volume of biking. This past summer I was doing, I think most of my rides were between 90 and 120 minutes. And it's just a lot of riding. It's just a lot of time commitment. And so I may approach biking more like I'm approaching running, where I have more higher intensity sessions, but the duration and the frequency is just not as much. So maybe I'm only biking 4 days a week and I have similar structure, one long zone two, and then two or three kind of zone three, zone four, maybe one of the sessions going up into zone five type thing.
Right. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. I feel like I've got a good idea of what's going on with your training, and I feel like this is a good transition into my programming here for the next little bit. We decided to switch up and do 3 days of weight training and 3 days of cardio, and then I'm playing hockey once a week there. I guess really my thought, or my first question to you, is when it comes to the cardio side of things, like what can I expect out of 3 days in terms of like progression and stuff like that?
The cardio side.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the way that we've structured it is that we have one high intensity zone four, zone five session and two kind of longer progressive zone two sessions. And because progressive overload is king always, we're using the same approach with the cardio. So in week one, your zone two sessions are starting out at 45 minutes, and then we're just casually adding 5 minutes a week to the zone two sessions so that by the end of maybe a 6 or 7 week cycle, we're at 65, 70, 75 minutes, something along those lines. And hopefully that doesn't end up accumulating too much of a time commitment for you. I feel like by doing it gradually, you can just make it work and fit in there. And then the progression on the hit intervals is a little bit more interesting and nuanced because with intervals, you have more variables that you can play with. What we did initially was we started with 4 sets of 5 minutes each with a 5 minute rest in between. And I noted that you wanted your heart rate to start at around 88% of max, maybe in the first interval. And then because we have heart rate drift, over time. Maybe your final interval ends at 93, 94, 95% of max heart rate, something like that. But that we're looking to maintain performance across each of those intervals. So even though on a graph, it might look like your first interval was the easiest one and the last interval was the hardest one because your heart rate is drifting up, if you look at the actual metric of your performance in each interval, we should see relatively flat performance across the board, such that, like, you use speed as your metric, right? So you were maintaining 17 miles per hour across each of the intervals. And then you noted that on one of them, you fell off at the end and you were down to 16 miles per hour. And so that would just be a sign that you put too much in on the earlier intervals and just didn't have enough left, or maybe you didn't have enough glycogen and maybe you hadn't eaten prior. There's a number of factors that can go into that, but that's the basis of where we start the intervals. And then once you nail those 4 intervals in a row where you can do them consistently at the same metric of performance, whatever that is, then the next step is to take a minute of rest away and try to emulate the same performance. So now it would be 4 intervals of 5 minutes each with 4 minutes rest in between. And then the next week, I give you back that minute of rest. So you're back to 5 minutes of rest, but now we add an extra interval. So now we're doing 5 sets of 5, looking to maintain the same performance across with 5 minutes of rest. The next week, we can take away another minute of rest. So now we have 5 intervals of 5 minutes each with only 4 minutes of rest. And then that's 4 weeks in. Usually at that point, I don't have a predetermined way that I like to progress. I look at how your performance was in that final week, and then we can make some adjustments from there to continue having you progress forward. With that said, I do think that much like with weights, progressive overload is not just doing more or reducing rest. It's actually the identification of the fact that you got better. So it's not that you're adding weight to the bar to ensure that you get stronger. It's that you add weight to the bar because you got stronger. And it's difficult to parse out which one is actually occurring before the other, the chicken and the egg thing. Both are probably necessary for the thing to occur, but philosophically, you do want to increase because you got better and not the.
Yeah. I have a few thoughts. I guess I'll bring those up. Yeah, as far as like the interval goes, I do really like that style. I think it's really cool to like the zone two is fine, but it's boring, but it still
Right.
is not. But this is like fun because it's like, hey, you really do push yourself. Now we'll see what I say here as you add in another interval. And this was for me, the big kind of thing that I needed to work on was what is that right intensity? Because I felt like the first couple weeks I did it, I left a little bit in the tank and I could have done a little bit more, which I feel like at the end of the day is probably not the worst thing in the world to do
I
that.
think
You
it's
just,
better. It's better
yeah,
to almost sandbag in the beginning and leave room for improvement.
because I see the similarities between that and like just hypertrophy training, right? It's like you do something new. It's like you don't really know where your limit is yet. And again, you would probably rather caution on a little less and then you get better, you figure it out, you take notes, and then you get better, right? This is one thing I never did when I did the cardio with when I've been doing it with you. I never really like you told me this initially. I just didn't do it. Like, hey, the speed and like the level that you have it on, right? Like having some form of metric to know like how to are you actually progressing and is it the right intensity? Because again, I again just actually tracking these things, like I can see how it's easy to underdo it, right? In
Mhm.
terms of it's just easy to underdo. It's also easy to overdo it, but I feel like it's also easy to just let that slip if you let your mind wander a
Mhm.
little bit there with that. So I feel like I finally got a good idea, but I also went maybe a little too hard last time because my power, it was really hard for me to maintain that power the entire final 5 minutes of the last one. So it's 16 and a half or something like that the whole
Yeah.
time.
Do you stand up on your bike at all, or is it all seated?
I usually just sit on it. And the way it's set up, I just sit on it. So
Is it like, can you stand up, or would that be inefficient?
I don't know. That's something that I would have to actually do and try and see if I can stand. I just never really thought about doing it, but it makes sense because you could probably produce more.
You can produce more power, but your cadence goes down. So I like the mix of it because I think it's a lot of just being more fast twitch fiber dominant at base. But it took me a long time when I first started biking to even be able to stay seated for a full zone two workout. Like I would have to stand up just because my legs would burn so bad.
Yeah.
And now I can get through it without standing up a single time, but it's still very nice when I do. I'm like, oh yeah, I should have stood up like 20 minutes ago because this feels amazing. So just giving yourself a reprieve from that same consistent pedal stroke and be able to engage more of your glute muscles and stuff like that, I think could be helpful for you in getting through those intervals or even some of your zone two work.
Yeah, that makes sense because I do feel my leg like with the bike, like I feel like the legs are like something I have to like I feel like can be a limiting factor at times because they tend to tire out where everything else is. I don't like systemically feel like tired, but it's like my legs are like burning. Those are the things that are making it a little bit tougher to maintain power or whatever it may be.
Yeah, 10 seconds standing up and then back to seated makes a huge difference.
Okay. Yeah, definitely have to. And you would recommend that outside of the intervals, like during the zone, like the when the goes down,
Whenever you
or it
feel
doesn't
like
matter.
your legs are limiting you, like
Got you.
whenever you
Okay.
feel like you're just accumulating too much lactic acid in one specific area of your legs, let your
Yeah.
other muscles contribute. I think the value for you in standing up might actually come on like that fourth interval or
Got
the interval where you're starting to see your speed decrease and your power output decrease. Standing up might be that what you need to use different muscles to be able to continue achieving the metric that you want to achieve.
Gotcha. Interesting. Okay. Yeah, definitely give that a shot. As far as like the whole layout of the cardio to like lower intensity one more interval style, what's the kind of rationale behind that in terms of what we're doing?
Yeah, just that you have three weight training sessions that are still your primary goal. And the more high intensity cardio work that we do, the more there potentially could be interference with the weight training. And so zone two, like we've talked about on many other episodes, just has that unique benefit of being extremely effective for your mitochondrial function and your cardiovascular conditioning, while also having a low fatigue cost.
Okay, that makes sense. And as far as like things that again, I'm sure really depends on the person and everything like that. But what are like some changes that I can expect and like notice by doing these 3 days? Or is there going to be anything that you think I can notice?
Acutely or over time, you should notice improvement in the things that you're doing. Like your zone two should get slightly better over time. Like you're either able to maintain the same speed at a lower heart rate, or then you notice and you're like, oh shit, my heart rate is lower. I'm going to have to increase speed so that my heart rate goes back up. It's the philosophical view of progressive overload. So I think that will happen with zone two is that you should see heart rate lower or speed higher. And then with the hit stuff, yeah, you should adapt to the hit stuff and you should get better at doing the hit, higher power output with same heart rate, et cetera, et cetera. As far as outside the gym things that you may notice, yeah, you're already like you're not an unfit guy. So it's going to be small margins of things that you might feel, but your resting heart rate might decrease a little bit. Your sense of parasympathetic recovery, ability to get parasympathetic after workouts might occur faster. You might notice better performance, less fatigue during your hockey, which I think would probably be the number one application where you would see the changes more than you would in everyday life because it's a sport where you're actually using the training that you're doing.
Yeah, so like it'd be something where essentially like so from my understanding, that's going to build like a good base. Like you could do things for longer. It's going to help you recover, everything like that. But then adding in like maybe the more interval style, that's going to be something where it's like, hey, now you can start to like really push the like intensity for longer periods of time. Like that's ideally what
Yep.
should be like you'll be able to go longer, but then also be able to maintain your performance across longer periods of time and not let see like your power drop off and stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. When I first started doing intervals, 5 minute intervals felt like an eternity. I remember getting 2 minutes in and being like, Jesus, when is this going to end? And then within a matter of weeks, I'm getting through multiple 5 minute intervals and it still sucks really bad. It's not like it feels easier, but I can do it and it doesn't feel like mentally I'm going to die the entire time. Yeah, I do think those adaptations occur pretty quickly and then you should see them manifest into other sport performance outside of lifting and the gym.
But then also too, a lot of that stuff, like obviously, like in terms of seeing it in everyday life, again, I guess the thing would be like again, everything that you do, you should be somewhat easier. You can recover faster from it. You're not going to tire out as quickly. Again, it depends on what you're doing, but I think just generally speaking, everything should improve like that. But then if we're also looking at like long-term health as well too, obviously having better cardiovascular fitness is probably going to be good for like long-term health and making sure that that's in a good spot too and maintaining your function as you get older and everything like that.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, absolutely. You should feel like shoveling the snow the other day was slightly easier than it would have been if you didn't do cardio.
So I feel like I didn't do a good job of explaining why that was so hard because I'm sure some people are like, dude, it's shoveling snow. Again, I know
No,
it can
it's
be hard.
heavy, bro. Snow is heavy, like really
Okay.
heavy.
But I messed up and I did not explain why it was so hard. Maybe I explained to you, but just if anyone's still listening to this and they saw it, whatever. But we had this combination of ice and sleet, right? So like the bottom of it was literally like an inch of ice at the bottom. So that was like the super hard part of it. I was sitting there, you're like, I'm just like, and like scrape that ended up being the hard part. But yes, either way, snow can be heavy, especially if it's a lot.
But yeah, trying to break up ice is not a job for a snow shovel.
Yeah, it was a plastic one, dude.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
ended up breaking, so it was a mess. Cool. As far as the again, man, I really do enjoy adding in the cardio. That's something I didn't think I would ever like, but I do. Again, just the feeling afterwards. It's a different feeling than weight training, and I just
yeah.
feel really good after doing it. And again, I just see again being able to do things and maintain that power and be able, like again with hockey and stuff like to me those are cool things that again it's I definitely neglected that for a while, so it's cool to see that there. As far as the weight training goes, so we dropped down to 3 days. I explained I thought the 3 days was good for me just because I have basically my entire lifting career, it's always been like 4+ days. I think I had, I don't think it was with you, it might have been with Jeremiah. I did like 1 3 day week training block, but other than that, it's been like 4 or 5 days. So like for me, I just felt, hey, this was a good time to just dial that back in general because it's like I haven't done that for forever. So I think just from an overall body standpoint, I think there was some benefit from it. What are your thoughts on that? Do you have any?
Yeah, my question for you first, though, is how do you feel with the 3 days? Do you feel like you're getting sufficiently trained, or do you feel like you are lacking in stimulus?
I don't. I feel like I am getting enough stimulus. And I've mentioned too, one of the things that I've really liked about the 3 days is the flexibility of it, especially right
Hmm.
now, right? Where it's that one day I had a shovel of snow, I couldn't train on Monday. Whereas I feel like if it was 4 days, it's yeah, you still have 3 days, but the way it's set up in the program, it gets fucked up if you have to move one day around. Again, if
Hmm.
we're looking at the on the week time scale, I know we've talked about this in the past where you don't necessarily have to think of it that way, but I do like that. I feel like there is a little bit more flexibility to change things around if need be. And I don't feel like it's, hey, I have to lift today. Otherwise, like the whole week gets screwed up.
Yeah, yeah. With your structure, which is lower, upper, full, you're still hitting every muscle group twice a week. So along the way, you're hitting like the evidence-based recommended frequency there. My structure in my program has taken it one step further where I train 3 days a week, but I go upper, lower, upper, and then lower, upper, lower. So I'm actually on the 2 week cycle. And I'm not actually hitting muscle groups every week, twice a week. Like one week upper body gets hit twice, and then the next week lower body gets hit twice. But the structure that I have is actually even more malleable because you can put either of the days back to back if you need to. Like I could go lower upper or I could go upper lower. It doesn't really matter back to
I
back.
see. Yeah.
Whereas with yours, because the full body day follows the upper body day, you wouldn't want to do upper body then full body the next day. So slightly less malleability there. But yeah, I think as far as gradual reductions in volume and or frequency, this is like the right place for you to be right now. And I'm not surprised that you're feeling sufficiently stimulated and that you're getting enough work in. And it also leaves you those 3 days to do cardio, which is super cool because one thing that I really endear about the 3 day a week lifting structure, especially when I can do it in a week where it's alternating days, is I just enjoy changing up the way that I'm training day to day, where it's a cardio day, then it's a lifting day, then it's a cardio day, then it's a lifting day. And that just keeps me fresh and engaged in whatever that thing is for the day.
And I feel like in terms of flexibility, like if you miss a day too, it's like also from a recovery standpoint, especially where I'm at right now with having a newborn and everything like that, I feel like also it allows for that recovery if I need it, right? Where it's like again, that was like the main thing for me that day that I shoveled the snow. Dude, I just feel beat up. So it's like I could do a zone 2 session that day, which again, like the goal of that is you're still going to get a stimulus, but it's not going to be overly fatiguing and it almost is
Mhm.
going to be restorative kind of in a way. So again, that's another thing there that I like about this setup and again having those days built in like that.
Yeah. Did you end up doing zone two on the day that you shoveled?
No, I just had that be my
No, I
workout for the
figured. I
day.
mean, that it sounds like quite the undertaking. What was the total time commitment of that session?
Of the snow
Yeah.
shovel. I don't know, man. I know I started at 10 a.m. I It was a heavy check-in day, so I broke that up in 2 hour increments. I was probably out there 3 or 4 times for 30 to 30-ish minutes
Yeah,
each
dude,
time.
that's
So
that's a full workout. How sore were you the next day?
oh, dude, my freaking shoulder was like, I just was sore in areas. I was like, what the hell is crazy? Now, the one downside, though, and we talked about this, was I've been having some tendonitis in my left elbow, and it was good. Like, it was so weird, dude. Like, when I had the baby, like my right wrist started to hurt. But I was like, man, my left elbow is good. And then there was like one session. It was an arm session. I did some arms, like preacher curls. Also, I'm like, man, this doesn't feel good. And then, man, it just got really bad, and it's been bothering me ever since we've been working on things to work through it. And it started to get a little bit better. And then I did that, dude, and it went backwards a little bit there. So,
Yeah. Have you still been using the Voodoo floss?
yep, I'm not as consistent as I should be, but I have been
Cool.
using it, and it does help. I notice a difference when I actually do it there. I guess is there less volume? Would you say there's less volume on the weekly time scale with this, or did you try to get it to where volume didn't really decrease too much?
Yeah, I don't think it decreased a whole ton. It must have in some aspects because, so I would say on lower body it didn't, because we have the full lower body day, which is literally the same as what you had before. Actually, before we were flirting with 2 leg days, and it was like one main leg day and then one kind of accessory leg day or whatever that was part of, I think, an upper body day. I can't remember, but I don't think leg volume has decreased. In some regard, there probably is a little bit of upper body volume that's decreased, but I do think that these sessions are slightly longer than they were before. So most of your days have like A through F. And before, when we were doing 4 days a week, most of them were A through E. So if you think about that, we had 18 different sections now, and we had 20 different sections then. So it's not really like a significant volume drop. You increase the length of your sessions a little bit, 5 or 10 minutes, and you do that across 3 days, and you basically make up the time for another session.
Yeah, yeah, and then again too, like maybe the intensity is a little bit higher on each set as well too, which can make up for some
Exactly.
of that. In terms of this, like how important would you say exercise selection is? Was there anything specific that you felt like you had to do here with 3 days compared to four? Or is it still the same thing? Or
Dude, I'm just still trying to optimize you for the limited equipment selection that you have at the moment. I just can't just optimize exercise selection any more than I have been.
yeah,
It's just the best I can do with what you have. And yeah,
so say I had perfect setup.
yeah, there's other things that we would do for sure that would be different. Like we definitely wouldn't be doing a single leg lying leg curl on a cable machine,
you'd be like a seated
a
leg curl or something like
proper
that?
leg curl machine. Yeah. Um, Let me pull this up.
Obviously, probably like a hack squat or a leg press or a back squat or something like that.
Absolutely. So yeah, sissy squat superset with walking dumbbell lunges is our primary quad movement here. I probably would have made that, if anything, an accessory instead of the primary. Then single leg dumbbell rear foot elevated. That's great. I don't see any problem there aside from maybe your dumbbells aren't heavy enough. I don't really know. Actually, no, it says you're using 50s, so that's not an issue there. For time saving purposes, so we could fit another section in, maybe you do a bilateral RDL and then we can do something else. Foam roller hack squats, yeah, obviously that would not be the movement of choice if we had everything. As far as the upper body though, like you have the dual cable machine, the Prime Prodigy rack. And so looking through this, there really isn't anything that if you were in a full gym that I would have you do differently on that upper body day. We got chest supported cable row, incline cable fly press, sideways iliac lat pull around, dumbbell bench, cable anterior delt press, and some curls and lateral raise and push downs. Yeah, that's a pretty robust, like all-inclusive upper body day. And then on the full body day, we have neutral grip pull downs, dumbbell fly press, split squat, the leg curl on the cable machine, we definitely probably would have done differently. And then the other three movements, which are shoulders and arms, I don't think there's not really any reason to think that you could do better at a commercial gym. So I would say primarily it's a couple movements here and there, but your upper body stuff is likely pretty optimized for what we could do anyways.
Yeah. So again, obviously, if I can get like a barbell, I'm sure that would obviously help with obviously the Nikki do RDLs, maybe like some sort of like back squat or something like that. Because I'm assuming that would probably be a little bit better than the hack squat, the foam roller
Foam
hack
roller,
squat.
yeah, maybe. I don't know. How do you feel about the foam roller hack squats?
It's good. It gets the job done, man, for sure. I feel like. Am I like super excited to do it every single time? No. I feel like that
Right.
would be the same way if I was doing back squats or leg press or anything like that. But
Yeah, yeah.
what's a little bit of a pain, but other than that, I think for what I have, it gets the job done for sure.
Yeah, I used them for a whole year during the initial stages of the lockdown, and I thought they were super productive. I nailed my quads really well with them, and I thought it was a treat to be able to do that given the limitations that we had at that time. So I don't know if like a back squat is necessarily better than the foam roller hack squat. I think it's just another variation that we can use. I also really back rack lunges and split squats and stuff like that. So I think loading that on your back allows you a bit more total weight load than
Yeah.
you can do when you're having to grip dumbbells. So yeah, I don't know. Like the back rack split squat is probably not one I would program for you just because there's challenges in bailing if you need to and balance and stuff like that. So I very much prefer a safety bar Bulgarian where you can Jefferson it. It's called Jeff. No, it's not Jefferson. It's what's the one where you hold onto the squat rack while you're doing squats?
I don't know, but I know exactly what you're talking about though.
Yeah, so there's a name for that, but I do my split squats that way with a safety bar. I probably wouldn't program that for you because you don't have a safety bar, but if you could definitely do back rack reverse lunges and stuff like that.
With the barbell? Is that what you're
Yeah, with a
saying?
barbell. Yeah, with
Gotcha.
a barbell. Yeah, because
Gotcha.
as long as your back foot's not elevated, I don't think there's a problem doing split-legged stuff with the barbell on your back. It really is just when the back foot's elevated, sometimes there's
I see.
balance issues, especially when you're approaching failure. You begin to push and then your body twists one way and suddenly you're like falling off to the side.
So what you're saying is if I had a safety bar, you would program in maybe some heel elevated or rear foot elevated split squats that I could hold on to the rack basically, right?
Correct. Yeah, I use that movement. I'm actually about to experiment with it again after we get off this podcast because it used to
Let's
be a
go.
staple movement in my program and I took it out a couple of years ago. And now that I'm dealing with this back thing, I think that doing more unilateral leg work is probably a good idea, especially glute specific work like that. So I'm going to go do some of those after we get off here and reintroduce those back in.
A couple more questions real quick on this. As far as progressions in this training cycle goes, are we going to add in some like partials and stuff like that? Or is it going to be maybe a little bit slower to progress those things or what?
Yeah, I would say pretty standard approach to including partials and lengthen sets and stuff like that. We're in week 4 right now. And I think I'm either beginning to include them this week or maybe it's starting next
You
week. I
had a
think
few.
a couple of them this week. And then you and I had talked offline about the way Kasim has been prescribing his partials for back movements as essentially scapular depressions instead of doing a full partial where you bend your arm. It's really more about being outstretched, feeling the stretch, and then depressing the scapula, almost like a lat version of doing a Kelso row. So a Kelso row, you're vertical or you're horizontal, like you're doing a bent over barbell row, but you just retract your shoulder blades. This would be the lat version of that. So it's coming from overhead and you're essentially just depressing your lats. So you're thinking about pulling your lats down to your waistline without bending your arm excessively. There'll be a little bit of arm bend because that follows suit with what your lats are doing as they depress down. But a goal of the partial is not necessarily to bend the arm.
I forgot to tell you this because you mentioned we were going to potentially do that. You actually had me do something like that with the iliac side, the single arm pull down.
Oh, did
A
I?
couple set where it was just scap depressions towards the end of the.
Yeah. That
They're
was like in a prior cycle.
yeah, in a prior cycle. Yeah,
Yeah,
they're
yeah.
interesting. It's hard. It's interesting. It's definitely a different concept, but it seemed like it worked. It felt good. So
Yeah, for sure. And I think taking rows into Kelso shrugs is also the next step of that. So that's something that we can include as well.
cool. And then, do you think like the training cycle will potentially go longer? Again, I know you like to feel it out, but could it with it being 3 days, could it potentially go
I
longer?
could see so, yeah. Like you and I usually make it 6 weeks. It wouldn't surprise me if we make it 8. We'll
Yeah.
see.
Cool. Is there anything else that you want to share about the program or anything like that, or anything else you can think of, or anything specific that you wanted to? Yeah.
No, I think it's interesting that you're now training 7 days a week. So you'd like me, we opened the podcast talking about movement and how I like to move every day. And now you're doing the same. As long as you play hockey on Sundays, you have something that you're doing active every single day. I guess my question for you would just be like, have you thought about it that way? And what do you think about that? Do you feel good with moving every day? Do you feel like your body or mind would like to have a rest day in there? What's your sense there?
Yep. So this is a good question. So first, when we were doing 4, I was still doing two zone twos, and then was still doing hockey. So I technically have been doing 7 days for a while now. And honestly,
Gotcha.
your post that you made about a year ago really made me rethink this and how I think about rest days and everything like that. So like previously, rest day was like, oh, you don't do shit, you're just off, you're not doing anything. And again, I definitely like now it's like I try to make sure that I do something each day, and it's a good thing and it's a bad thing. It's a good thing because I think that's a good thing for overall health to be doing that every single day. The downside is now it's like I start to get a little anxiety about not getting some form of like movement in on certain days if that's the case. But my thought is, hey, if I'm doing something 6 days a week most of the time, and maybe there's one week where I can't get something in, I'm still gonna get 8,000 steps or 10,000
Yeah.
steps in a day on that day if I can't get like an actual dedicated session in. But No, I think it's super important. And if anything, it helps with recovery. And obviously, if we're looking at like how your mind feels and everything like that, it definitely helps out with that. Yeah, that's how I think about it.
Yeah, so what does that, you use the word anxiety. I think there's a few words that could work there, but what does that anxiety or mindset feel like and look like for you when you have a session planned for the day, but life gets in the way and you're unable to do that thing that you have planned?
Yep. So yesterday was a prime example of this where I ended up lifting, but like stuff's going on with the baby, so I had to push it off a little bit. And I just like get like I just feel like mentally I'm just like not in as good of a mood, and I'm just like oh crap, I should be doing this, right? That's where my mind goes. I ended up
Hmm.
working out later at night than I wanted to, but I was like I need to get this in for. It was more like I did it for not necessarily like I'm gonna lose all my gains, but it was like dude, I like mentally I just feel better when I do this, and so I ended up getting it in later. So
Hmm.
I think if anything, it's like I guess maybe a little bit more flexibility with like when I actually train versus feeling like I like ideally I would do it earlier in the day. Sometimes stuff just
Yeah.
comes up. So I don't know. Did that answer your
Yeah, yeah.
question?
When do you usually train? Are you like a midday kind of guy?
Between now with Colby, it's usually between 4 and 6, but it's always been between like 2 and 6 essentially. Or it's shifted a little bit. It probably before was like between 12 and 3, and now it's probably
Mhm.
shifted between 2 and 5 essentially.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah, I'm intrigued by when people train and how that impacts the mindset around training because I gravitate, as does Greg, when we had the conversation on my new podcast. Both of us are morning training guys. And I think because we're morning training guys, we in some way have grown a dependency to have that catecholamine, epinephrine, norepinephrine, dopamine response earlier in the day. And so both of us noted that when we are unable to get our workout in as we usually have planned in the morning, that maybe it has more of a dramatic impact on our ability to, I don't want to stay sane, keep a positive mindset or whatever, than
See, yeah,
somebody that trains in the evening because you already start every day without training anyways.
I
And
see.
so it's not like yeah, it's not an expected thing that you need to do.
I'll definitely say like pushing it off, I feel like can weigh on you because it's like you're like, man, I still have to, even though I love doing it, I still have to do this. And I definitely did not like that. And that's partly why I don't like training that late. It's like nice to be like, hey, I did this for myself earlier in the day. But that makes sense. You are used to training in the morning, you get those, like you said, the adrenaline and stuff like that early in the day, or
Yeah,
catecholamines early in the day. And you're used to that. And when you don't have that, it's okay. What's going on here?
exactly. Yeah, so that's interesting. That's something I'll definitely dive into more with future guests if they work out in the evening as well.
The time of day.
Yeah,
I,
yeah,
I
yeah.
I do know if we're looking at like overall health and like things like that, like my understanding, probably doing it earlier in the day is going to be a little bit more optimal. I put it in quotations than doing it late at night. But again, when you can, like, it's better to do it than to not do it.
Yeah, that would align better with our circadian rhythms of movement in the morning and stuff. But yeah, at the end of the day, I think it's again working with margins.
Yep. Cool, man. Well, appreciate your time here again. It was a fun chat. I feel like a lot of the stuff we just went off the cuff and had a lot of good conversation today. So appreciate it. Anything coming out on your end? Or again, if somebody is new to this and they don't know much about you, where can they find you at?
Yeah, Brian Boorstein on Instagram. My group programs and stuff are all available there. And then check out the new podcast when it drops, Life Reflected podcast.
That's the worst self promotion I've ever heard in my entire life. Just kidding. That's just how you are, man. But I love it. But yeah, your Instagram, and you also have your other podcast too that you forgot to mention.
Oh yeah, Eat,
With
Train,
Air.
Prosper, where we
Yep.
talk about hypertrophy and stuff.
Yep.
Yeah,
Cool, man. We'll appreciate your time as always, and we'll obviously get you on again in the future.
sounds good.